3 aircraft carriers, 200 fighter jets, 15,000 troops, and 27 warships now stand deployed in the region, as negotiations between the United States and Iran have officially collapsed, with the diplomatic table irrevocably shattered. President Trump just moments ago exclusively told me over the phone that he has unilaterally canceled Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner's trip to Pakistan, where they were scheduled to meet with the Iranians. In fact, Iran had already conceded on the Strait of Hormuz, an issue over which it had refused to compromise for days. The IRGC was reportedly in a state of panic. This was the regime's last gasp, a demand for a buffer zone, a space to retreat. The regime found itself surrounded by an unprecedented, massive firepower, encircled by an impenetrable iron ring spanning all strategic waters from the Red Sea to the Gulf of Oman. Panic set in among the IRGC command when they witnessed this American fleet. Abbas Iraqi, who was urgently sent to Moscow, returned empty-handed. China's icy silence has completely cornered Iran, and despite Tehran's offer to ease tensions, negotiations reached a complete deadlock due to nuclear red lines. The Trump administration flatly rejected any extension agreements, stating no nuclear weapons as its #1 condition. This uncompromising decision immediately pushed regional tensions to a peak. The moment the diplomatic door closed, a massive presence entered from the sea. 3 U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, the USS Gerald R. Ford in the Red Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, and the USS George H.W. Bush entering from the Indian Ocean formed a deadly triangle. The United States blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is advancing with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel and the crushing force of a sledgehammer. The more than 27 heavy warships currently deployed in the region are not merely a deterrent. They are an active strangulation mechanism. This level of naval concentration and operational assertiveness in a single theater is highly unusual, signaling a shift from traditional deterrence to active enforcement, a strategic posture rarely seen outside of declared hostilities. These floating military bases, anchored in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman, have begun monitoring all commercial traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports with millimeter-level precision. With a total of over 200 fifth-generation fighter jets and more than 15,000 fully equipped personnel, the region has effectively been locked down. The blockade is operating with such tight discipline that to date, 39 cargo ships and tankers have been turned back by American destroyers for straying from designated routes or carrying suspicious cargo. The incident that occurred in the Arabian Sea on the morning of April 28th was a concrete demonstration of this resolve. Special operations units attached to the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit conducted a professional infiltration and inspection operation on the commercial vessel MV Blue Star 3, which was exhibiting suspicious behavior. The ship's cargo and route were examined in detail. Since no violations were detected, the vessel was permitted to proceed. However, this operation demonstrated to the international community that control over waters Iran considers its own backyard has fully shifted to Washington. It is important to note that this extensive blockade is not limited to surface assets alone. Beneath the surface, an invisible technological war is being waged. Autonomous underwater vehicles and Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines are continuously conducting minesweeping operations around the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. has stated, if Iran is putting mines in the water or otherwise threatening American commercial shipping or American forces, we will shoot to destroy. No hesitation. Thanks to advanced sonar networks, Virginia-class platforms record and analyze every acoustic trace in the region. Any potential sabotage or mine-laying attempt by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is detected and neutralized at the planning stage through this underwater surveillance network. The rules of engagement issued to U.S. task forces appear to be extremely clear. Any asymmetric element threatening civilian shipping will be immediately neutralized. This controlled containment is inflicting a serious daily loss of hundreds of millions of dollars on Iran's energy exports. The inability to transport produced oil to international markets is straining storage facility capacities and leading to the mandatory shutdown of production wells. The fleets of speedboats that the IRGC once presented as a major deterrent are now struggling to leave their bases in the face of Aegis radar systems and a continuous aerial surveillance network. The simultaneous presence of 3 aircraft carriers in the region is not merely a logistical buildup, but also a significant projection of power that disrupts the balance of the global security architecture. Deploying 3 carrier strike groups to a single operational theater simultaneously is an extraordinary logistical feat. reflecting an unparalleled commitment of resources and a clear intent to dominate the battle space, a posture typically reserved for major power projection scenarios. F-35C and F-A-18, Super Hornet squadrons taking off from the decks of the USS Gerald R. Ford, USS Abraham Lincoln, and USS George H.W. Bush are establishing clear air superiority within the CENTCOM area of responsibility. This immense firepower holds the potential to destroy Iran's land-to-sea anti-ship missiles or aerial assets while they are still on their launchers. This sharp shift in naval dominance in favor of the U.S. has effectively shut down the IRGC's traditional patrol activities in the Strait of Hormuz. Ali Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers accompanying the aircraft carriers are safeguarding allied nations' energy shipments with their missile defense shields, while actors in the Gulf, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, feel secure under this massive shield. The Iranian military's operational maneuvering space is shrinking by the hour. This tightening circle of American fire on the ground is pushing the regime toward a deep internal reckoning where its own generals are questioning one another. The Navy's amphibious task forces are on high alert in the region, prepared for any possible scenario. Well-equipped units like the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit are continuously patrolling strategic waters aboard landing ships. These forces have been deployed to breach coastal defense lines, monitor radar stations, and ensure the security of maritime trade when necessary. Underwater drones, known for their stealth, report all military activity beneath the surface in real time. Mine-clearing operations conducted by autonomous systems keep the strait open for civilian shipping while neutralizing Iran's threat capabilities. Supported by strategic B-52 bombers and F-15E fleets, this air umbrella elevates the deterrent power of the U.S. military presence in the region to new heights. The flawless operation of logistics and supply lines demonstrates the U.S.'s capacity to sustain this long-term blockade. Asymmetric warfare tactics can no longer find a military response against today's millimeter-wave radar networks. This strategic impasse faced by the Revolutionary Guards on the ground is causing massive tremors in the regime's security architecture. Operational constraints at sea represent not only a loss of military prestige, but also trigger a governance crisis within the state apparatus. Seeking to shift the blame for this major operational failure onto the civilian administration, the IRGC is attempting to consolidate decision-making mechanisms under its own authoritarian control. However, this concentration of power is fueling internal conflicts within the bureaucratic apparatus, laying the groundwork for a serious crisis of confidence. While some figures in the military wing label diplomatic efforts as a sign of weakness, strong signals indicate that fierce debates and dismissals are taking place in the corridors of power in Tehran. Feeble and unplanned attempts to assert a presence in the Strait of Hormuz are instantly blasted by the technological superiority of the U.S. Navy. As the devastating impact of economic isolation shakes the foundations of the state, the dramatic drop in oil revenues is driving military and public finances into an unsustainable budget deficit. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Iraqi's urgent flight to Moscow on April 26th to 27th in search of a diplomatic way out was a clear reflection of this predicament on the international stage. Behind-the-scenes talks with the Putin administration fell far short of providing the military or strategic support Iran had hoped for. While Russia grapples with its own geopolitical challenges and logistical issues on the front lines, it refused to open a direct front against the U.S. on behalf of Iran, which is under a comprehensive embargo. Foreign Minister Lavrov's statements, which remained within the bounds of diplomatic courtesy, revealed that there was no concrete commitment on the table to rescue Iran from this blockade. Abbas Iraqi's return empty-handed proved how the external alliances the IRGC relied on could become ineffective in times of crisis. This pragmatic silence from the Eastern Bloc created great disappointment and chaos in Tehran. This diplomatic and military stalemate is bringing a collapse scenario to the forefront on Iran's home front. The public feels the weakening of the state's claims to protect borders and manage the economy every day at market stalls and gas stations. The fuel and currency shortages caused by the U.S. blockade are leading to power outages and rising prices for basic foodstuffs. The discount packages offered by the Ministry of Energy to those who reduce consumption appear to be nothing more than a temporary band-aid measure designed to mask infrastructure deficiencies. The state's capacity to provide citizens with basic living standards is being severely eroded. The regime's image of invincibility presented to the public is rapidly fading in the shadow of American ships in the Gulf. The social anger stemming from economic desperation holds the potential for a new wave of mutiny in the streets. The scale of diplomatic isolation is becoming far more devastating due to China's moves. While the Chinese government wants the Strait of Hormuz to remain open to ensure global trade continues uninterrupted, it demonstrated this not by providing military support to Iran, but by evacuating its own citizens from the region. Beijing's call for the evacuation of its citizens is a heavy diplomatic message, confirming the stage the crisis has reached, and Iran's isolation within the international system. China's decision to prioritize citizen evacuation over direct support for Iran marks a significant departure from its historical balancing act, indicating a pragmatic assessment that the risks of entanglement now far outweigh any strategic or economic benefits of continued close alignment. China, which for years has circumvented sanctions to secure cheap energy from Iran, was forced to slow this trade in the face of the U.S. Navy's physical blockade. The tight controls by CENTCOM and INDOPACOM forces extending all the way to the Indian Ocean have crushed Iran's gray market trade. As the lifelines providing the regime's foreign exchange revenue have narrowed, Iran's economy has been left to grapple with its structural problems. While President Xi Jinping has called for energy security and the protection of supply chains, he has carefully avoided directly endorsing Iran's policies. Even China and Russia are abandoning this sinking ship, not just economically but physically as well. The fact that Beijing, Moscow, and many other countries are successively calling on their citizens to evacuate Iran immediately is the clearest, most indisputable proof of the approaching perfect storm and the regime's collapse. For years, China has been circumventing sanctions to purchase cheap black market oil from Iran, 1.4 million barrels per day, at a discount of $8 to $10 per barrel compared to Brent. As we demonstrated in previous analyses, the U.S. has cut off this flow on a global scale. Now, the United Arab Emirates, which has completely lifted OPEC production limits, is stepping in. For China, which is evacuating its citizens from a country on the brink of war via emergency flights, the energy choice is simple: sanctioned, risky, dangerous Iranian oil, or legal, unlimited, stable UAE oil. Beijing will turn its face toward the Gulf without hesitation. The oil bridge has been cut off from both sides. On one side, the U.S. blockade has stopped tankers. On the other, the UAE has provided an alternative supply. Iran's last major customer is also walking away from the table. The instinct to secure its economic lifelines will swiftly steer Beijing away from funding a collapsing regime. Even in the face of international pressure and sanctions risks, with the UAE offering a seamless and cheap energy alternative, no rational state would want to put its own companies in the crosshairs of the U.S. Treasury. This shift in alignment means Iran will lose its last major customer and be completely wiped out of the global energy market. The fact that a pragmatic power like China is evacuating its diplomats and citizens and abandoning ship is the clearest proof that no one trusts the Iranian regime on the international stage, and that they have been completely written off. At the same time, even the possibility of Russia providing weapons or logistical support via the Caspian Sea remains feeble, as Moscow, struggling in the quagmire of its own war, no longer has the strength to extend a hand to a collapsing Iran. It is impossible for a Russia scrambling to evacuate its own citizens from the streets of Tehran to bail out the IRGC's bankrupt budget or to get its overflowing oil reserves to international markets. Furthermore, the efforts of South American countries like Venezuela and Brazil to increase their energy export capacity in cooperation with the Americans have completely ended Iran's search for alternative markets on a global scale. This massive realignment on the world energy map is a flawless diplomatic checkmate that perfectly isolates Iran from the global system. When factoring in the cryptocurrency money laundering networks that are dissolving under the watchful eye of Western intelligence agencies, the regime's hopes of securing foreign currency have been completely exhausted. Iran's Look East doctrine has crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds in the face of its allies' evacuation flights and the allure of UAE oil. Iran has become so blinded that it cannot grasp it is merely a pawn in the grand global chess game it tried to play, and has long since been cast off the board. The fact that regime officials who continue their harsh rhetoric in public are seeking a diplomatic way out behind closed doors points to a deep inconsistency. Calls for war preparations emerging from the National Security Commission are viewed as a move aimed at consolidating the domestic public rather than addressing the balance of power on the ground. Demands brought to the negotiating table, such as the continuation of uranium enrichment, find no diplomatic response in an environment where the U.S. Navy controls strategic waters. It is inconsistent with rational politics for a state that cannot market its own oil and has shut down production wells due to full storage facilities to impose preconditions on the global system. This situation demonstrates how the regime's self-imposed red lines have been erased due to their practical irrelevance on the ground. State officials are struggling to keep their radical base united while simultaneously grappling with the heavy costs of global isolation. As the illusion of power presented to the public by the regime crumbles, the hardline stance at the diplomatic table is giving way to behind-the-scenes efforts to find solutions. However, Washington is responding to these efforts with increasing military pressure on the ground. The decision-making crisis among the political elite is undermining the state's institutional functioning and eroding the predictability of diplomacy. Iran's leadership faces a difficult choice between watching the economy collapse and enduring the destructive consequences of military provocations. This situation has also completely undermined Iran's delusional doctrine that Western democracies will cave in under electoral pressure, catching them at their weakest moment. Iran's entire strategic framework built on buying time has collapsed, and they have been forced to confront the reality that the side growing weaker and more fragile with each passing day is their own. This turning point in history clearly represents the final stage in which Iran has been completely marginalized on the geopolitical stage and has fallen into the pit it dug for itself. A regime that redraws its own red lines every day, but cannot defend any of them, has ceased to be an actor in international relations and has become nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Faced with the resolute alliance of the free world, Iran's archaic theocracy has suffered a crushing defeat at the diplomatic table, just as it has on the battlefield. Consequently, diplomatic schizophrenia must give way to a bitter awakening and the regime's silent disintegration. Those who threaten the U.S. military in front of cameras are begging at the negotiating table to survive in secret rooms. But the game is over. Conclusion: negotiations are over. No bargaining, no delay. With a single-word response, Trump sparked the end of a 47-year-old terrorist empire. And a magnificent armada unseen since 2003 has deployed to the field to settle the score with Tehran. 3 aircraft carriers, 200 fighter jets, 15,000 troops, 27 warships, Marines, submarines, minesweepers, F-35s. The Strait of Hormuz is blocked. 39 ships have been diverted from their routes. Inside, the IRGC has sidelined the civilian government, but this is not a sign of strength, but the first sign of a crack. Moscow returned empty-handed. Beijing sent a message via evacuation flights. UAE oil has drawn China into the Gulf. All the conventional cards in the Revolutionary Guard's hands are gone. Asymmetric cards are insufficient. Economic cards are empty. Diplomatic cards have melted away. Now the only question is, will the regime surrender, escalate militarily, or continue to quietly collapse? They all have a losing scenario. None have a winning scenario.